Okay, so this is the final video on CC11, which is a paper one only topic. In the last video, we looked at extracting metals using carbon. In this video, we're going to look at extracting metals using biological methods. There are two biological methods that you need to know: phytoextraction and bio leaching. Phytoextraction makes use of plants, so it's called a biological method because you're using plants, which are living things, to extract metals. And what you do is you plant plants on contaminated soil, so soil that you know contains metal ions. The plants will absorb the metal ions into their roots. So here I have got the roots and I've got some copper, which are metal ions, in the soil, and the plant can absorb those copper ions into their roots using active transport. The copper ions will all collect in the plant's roots and become concentrated. You'll end up with lots of copper ions concentrated in the roots of the plant. Then you can take the plant, you can harvest it, you can burn it, and from the ashes you can collect the copper. So if you were asked what phytoextraction is, this is what you would need to say. The plants absorb metal ions through their roots. So they don't absorb pieces of solid metal, they absorb ions, okay, which will be dissolved in the water. So make sure you're using that word ions there. Plants absorb metal ions through their roots. Ions then become concentrated. Don't necessarily need to say that, but you do need to say that plants are burned and the metals are harvested from the ash. It is a slow method because you're obviously going to have to plant trees, wait for them to grow, so it's a slow method, but it makes use of low-grade ores. So ores that don't have a lot of metal in them that you wouldn't normally be worth your while to extract using carbon or electrolysis. You can use this method to extract. And it reduces the need to find new ores by mining. So typically if you want to go and find new ores, you're going to have to dig mines. Okay, that's quite unsightly, and mining is also quite dangerous. It destroys the environment. So anything that reduces the need to mine is going to be an advantage. So yes, it's slow, but you can make uses of low-grade ores and reduces the need to mine. So that's phytoextraction using trees or plants. The other biological method is called bio leaching. Again, it's a biological method because it uses bacteria, and in bio leaching, bacteria breaks down ores to form solutions containing metal ions. So certain bacteria, so remember ores are rocks that contain metal compounds, you'll use bacteria to break down these rocks, release the metal ions, and you'll form solutions that contain these metal ions. You can then get the pure metal from these solutions by using a displacement reaction. I've got an example of a displacement reaction here. So let's say, for example, your bacteria broke down the ore and you produced a copper sulfate solution. Because there was copper metal in that ore, the bacteria broke it down and you end up with a copper sulfate solution. Because it's a solution, I'm using the state symbol AQ. If I want to use a displacement reaction, I need a metal more reactive than copper. And if I look at my reactivity series, I will see that iron is more reactive than copper. So if I just use scrap iron that's not particularly good quality, I can add my solid iron to my copper sulfate solution. The iron and the copper will swap places because iron's more reactive, and I form iron sulfate and I form pure copper. So that's what I'm trying to get. I'm trying to get the pure copper. I first use the bacteria, break down these ores into a solution, then chuck in a bit of scrap iron, and I'm going to end up with my pure copper. So that's bio leaching. It makes use of bacteria. So again, you would need to mention that bacteria are breaking down the ores containing metal ions. Again, you're talking about ions, and then you obtain these metals from solution by displacement reactions. You need to know the advantages and the disadvantages of bioleaching and phytoextraction. So an advantage for both processes is that you're not producing harmful gases, causing less damage to the landscape than mining, so reduces the need to mine, so you're not digging or destroying the landscape, and conserves supplies of higher grade ores. Disadvantage, they're both very slow methods. An advantage of bioleaching that doesn't apply to phytoextraction is it doesn't require high temperatures, but it does produce toxic substances and sulfuric acid. Okay, so it's not producing harmful gases, but it is producing sulfuric acid. Phytoextraction and advantage is you can extract metals from contaminated soils by growing your plants there, and a disadvantage that only phytoextraction has is it's actually quite expensive. Growing the plants requires quite a lot of manual labor to get people to plant them, to tend to them, to harvest them, then to burn them and extract. So it's quite a big job. So it can be more expensive than mining in some cases. And growing plants is also dependent on weather conditions. So with bioleaching and phytoextraction, you need to know what they are, which will be the terms that the sentences there that I've underlined, and you need to know their advantages and disadvantages. The other bit of content at the end of this topic is about life cycle assessment and recycling. So life cycle assessment is just if you were about to make a new product, you would need to carry out this life cycle assessment, and you would need to work out exactly what raw materials you're going to use to make your new product. You need to work out the environmental impact of the product, and decide whether it's worthwhile to actually manufacture this, and whether it can be recycled or not. So I have here a list of questions that you would need to consider when you're completing a life cycle assessment. And then at the end, we've got what are the advantages and disadvantages of recycling metals. So make sure you know some advantages and disadvantages of recycling metals. I think advantages most people are quite comfortable with. It's kind of self-explanatory, but the disadvantages, recycling is actually expensive. Okay, you have to collect, transport, and sort all of these metals, and that can also often be quite expensive. So that's your main disadvantage, is just the cost of recycling. The advantages are kind of more self-explanatory: less waste ending up in landfill, less pollution, less need to mine because you're recycling old metals rather than mining for new ones. So this content, not difficult. But there is a bit of content there to learn. They can ask for even 6-mark questions on life cycle assessment and recycling, so make sure you are familiar with this content.